They were legends, voices, icons, heroes, millions admired. But in a single brutal moment on the road, everything ended. A flash of headlights, a screech of tires, and history changed forever. From rock stars to athletes, these lives were cut short in shocking crashes that left the world stunned and grieving. Behind the fame were fragile human stories and endings no one saw coming. Tom Mix. Long before modern action stars filled movie screens, there was Tom Mix, the original cowboy hero of Hollywood. In the 1920s, Mix was one of the biggest names in silent films, a fearless performer known for his daring stunts, sharp shooting skills, and charismatic smile. Wearing his iconic cowboy hat and riding across dusty western landscapes, he appeared in more than 300 films and became one of the most recognizable stars of his time. To millions of fans, Tom Mix wasn't just an actor, he was the Wild West. But on October 12, 1940, the legend's story would come to a sudden and tragic end. That afternoon, Mix was driving his sleek convertible across the desert roads of Arizona. He had just visited the sheriff in Tucson and was heading north, taking a detour along a quiet highway near Florence. The road stretched endlessly across the desert, empty and peaceful beneath the blazing sun. Then, without warning, the journey turned deadly. As Mix drove along the highway, construction barriers suddenly appeared ahead. With almost no time to react, he slammed on the brakes, but it was too late. The car swerved violently and overturned, flipping in a cloud of dust and twisted metal. Inside the wreckage, Tom Mix suffered fatal injuries. When rescuers arrived, the legendary cowboy who had survived countless movie stunts and on-screen gunfights was gone. He was 60 years old. Jack Anglin. In the golden age of country music, Jack Anglin was a voice that millions of Americans instantly recognized. As one half of the beloved duo, the Anglin brothers, he helped shape the warm storytelling style that defined country music in the 1940s and 1950s. His songs carried the simple honesty of small-town America songs about love, faith, family, and the struggles of everyday life. To his fans, Jack Anglin wasn't just a performer. He was part of their lives. But in March of 1963, tragedy was already hanging in the air. Just days earlier, one of Jack's closest friends in the country music world, Patsy Cline, had died in a devastating plane crash that shocked Nashville and shattered the hearts of fans everywhere. Jack was deeply affected by the loss. Determined to say goodbye to his friend, he got into his car and began driving toward the funeral. It was meant to be a quiet, solemn journey, a final chance to honor someone he cared about. But fate had a cruel twist waiting on the road ahead. As Jack Anglin drove along the highway on March 8, 1963, his vehicle suddenly lost control. In a violent crash, the car slammed into another vehicle, leaving the country singer with fatal injuries. The man who was on his way to mourn a friend would never reach the funeral. Jack Anglin died that day at just 47 years old. The tragedy stunned the country music community. In a heartbreaking twist of fate, two beloved voices of country music were gone within days of each other. Harry Chapin. In the 1970s, few songwriters had the power to move listeners the way Harry Chapin did. He wasn't just singing songs, he was telling stories that felt painfully real. Through unforgettable hits like Taxi and the heartbreaking classic Cats in the Cradle, Chapin captured the struggles, regrets, and fragile moments of everyday life. His music made people stop, think, and sometimes even cry. Beyond the stage, he was also known as a compassionate humanitarian who dedicated much of his life to fighting world hunger. But on July 16, 1981, the storyteller's own story took a tragic turn. That afternoon, Harry Chapin was driving his 1975 Volkswagen Rabbit along the busy Long Island Expressway in New York. He was on his way to perform at a free benefit concert, one of many charity events he often played to support causes he believed in. Even at the height of his fame, helping others had always been part of who he was. The highway was crowded traffic moving fast. Then, in a horrifying moment, disaster struck. A massive semi-trailer truck slammed violently into the back of Chapin's car. The impact crushed the small vehicle and sent it spinning across the highway. Emergency crews rushed to the scene, and Chapin was airlifted by helicopter to Nassau County Medical Center. Doctors fought desperately to save him, but the injuries were too severe. Harry Chapin died that day at just 38 years old. The loss stunned fans around the world. A voice that had spent years telling stories about the human condition had suddenly fallen silent. Yet his message never disappeared. Eddie Cochran. Rock and roll in the late 1950s had a new rebellious heartbeat, and one of the loudest voices behind it was Eddie Cochran. With electrifying hits like Summertime Blues and Come On Everybody, Cochran didn't just sing about teenage freedom, he embodied it. His raw guitar riffs, fearless attitude, and youthful energy made him one of the brightest rising stars of rock music. Fans believed they were witnessing the birth of a legend who would dominate the next decade. But fate had other plans. On the night of April 17, 1960, after finishing a successful tour in the United Kingdom, Cochran climbed into a taxi alongside his girlfriend Sharon Sheeley and fellow musician Gene Vincent. They were heading toward London Airport, preparing to return home to America. The road seemed quiet, almost peaceful. Then, in a split second, everything changed. The taxi lost control on a dark road in Chippenham, England. Tires screamed, metal crushed. The vehicle slammed violently into a lamppost. In the chaos of the crash, Cochran was thrown forward, suffering catastrophic head injuries. Doctors rushed him to the hospital and fought desperately to save him. But the damage was too severe. The next day, at just 21 years old, Eddie Cochran was gone. The world of rock and roll lost not only a star, but a future legend whose story ended far too soon. Even today, the echo of his guitar reminds us of a life that burned bright, but vanished in a single tragic night. Dottie West. In the golden era of country music, few voices carried as much warmth and strength as Dottie West. She wasn't just another singer on the radio, she was a trailblazer. At a time when the country music industry was dominated by men, Dottie fought her way to the top, becoming one of the first female country artists to write her own songs and produce her own records. Her heartfelt voice and emotional storytelling won the love of millions, turning her into one of the Grand Ole Opry's brightest stars. But on August 30th, 1991, that incredible journey took a heartbreaking turn. That evening, Dottie was rushing to make it to a performance at the legendary Grand Ole Opry. Her car suddenly stalled along the road, leaving her stranded and running late. Determined not to miss the show, she flagged down a passing driver, someone she trusted. It was her neighbor, George Thaxton. He offered to drive her the rest of the way. As they approached the Opryland Highway exit ramp, the car sped toward the curve. But the ramp was meant for a slow 25 miles per hour. Witnesses later reported the car was traveling more than double that speed. In an instant, the vehicle lost control. It flew off the ramp, slammed violently into an embankment, and the impact left Dottie with devastating injuries. Doctors fought desperately to save her life, but the damage was too severe. Days later, the beloved country music legend passed away. Lisa Left Eye Lopes. In the 1990s, the sound of R&B and hip-hop was changing, and at the center of that revolution stood Lisa "Left Eye" Lopes. As a member of the iconic girl group TLC, Lisa wasn't just a performer. She was a force of personality. With her fiery energy, fearless style, and unforgettable rap verses, she helped turn TLC into one of the best-selling female groups of all time. Hits like Waterfalls, No Scrubs, and Creep dominated the charts, and fans admired Lisa not only for her talent, but for her honesty, creativity, and passion. But on April 25, 2002, everything came to a tragic end. Lisa was in Honduras, taking time away from the spotlight, while working on a personal documentary and searching for peace in her life. That afternoon, she was driving a rented Mitsubishi Montero SUV along a rural road with several people riding with her. The journey seemed calm, just another drive under the bright Central American sky. Then suddenly, disaster struck. A truck appeared ahead. In a split second, Lisa swerved to avoid it, only to face another oncoming vehicle. With no time to react, she jerked the wheel again. The SUV spun violently out of control. The vehicle rolled multiple times, crashing into two trees before finally coming to a stop in a roadside ditch. The impact was devastating. Several passengers were thrown from the vehicle. Lisa Lopes was not wearing a seatbelt. She died instantly at the scene. The music world was stunned. At just 30 years old, one of the most unique voices in modern R&B was gone. Isadora Duncan. In the early 20th century, dance had rules, strict, elegant, and tightly controlled. But Isadora Duncan shattered them all. She rejected the rigid traditions of classical ballet and created something revolutionary, a free, natural style of movement that expressed raw human emotion. Barefoot flowing across the stage in loose silk gowns, Duncan transformed dance into pure poetry. Audiences around the world were mesmerized. She wasn't just a dancer, she was a symbol of artistic freedom. But on September 14, 1927, her extraordinary life ended in one of the most shocking accidents in history. That evening, in Nice, France, Duncan stepped into a sleek, open-top sports car for a short ride along the Riviera. She wore one of her signature accessories, a long, flowing, hand-painted silk scarf draped dramatically around her neck. The car began to move, the wind catching the scarf as it fluttered behind her. Then, in a split second, tragedy struck. The scarf whipped backward and became entangled in the spinning wheel of the vehicle. In an instant, the fabric tightened violently around her neck as the axle pulled it into the machinery. The force was catastrophic. Duncan was yanked from her seat, suffering a fatal neck injury almost instantly. The shocking accident happened so quickly that there was no chance to save her. She was 50 years old. Razzle Nicholas, Razzle Dingley. In the wild electric world of 1980s rock and glam metal, few bands captured the chaos and excitement of the era quite like Hanoi Rocks. And behind the explosive sound of the band's music was the powerful drumming of Nicholas Razzle Dingley. Energetic, charismatic, and completely fearless, Razzle quickly became a fan favorite. His drumming style brought raw energy to every performance, helping the band rise through the rock scene with unstoppable momentum. But on the night of December 8, 1984, a celebration among rock stars turned into a devastating tragedy. That evening, members of Hanoi Rocks were partying at the home of Motley Crue singer Vince Neil in California. The night was filled with music, laughter, and alcohol, the kind of chaotic party the rock world was famous for. At some point during the night, someone realized the party had run out of beer. So Vince Neil and Razzle decided to make a quick trip to the store. They climbed into Neil's powerful sports car and drove off into the night. Both men had been drinking, But like so many reckless decisions made during wild rock parties, no one expected what would happen next. As they headed back from the liquor store, the car suddenly veered out of control. In a violent crash, the vehicle slammed into another car with devastating force. The impact was catastrophic. Razzle suffered massive injuries and died instantly at the scene. He was only 24 years old. Pelle Lindbergh. In the fast, unforgiving world of professional hockey, greatness is measured by the ability to stand strong under pressure. And in the mid-1980s, few goalies embodied that strength like Pelle Lindbergh. The Swedish-born netminder had quickly become one of the brightest stars in the NHL, guarding the net for the Philadelphia Flyers with fearless reflexes and incredible athleticism. His performances electrified fans, and his talent earned him one of hockey's highest honors, the Vezina Trophy, awarded to the league's best goaltender. At just 26 years old, it seemed like Lindbergh's career was only beginning. But on November 11, 1985, everything changed. Late that night, Lindbergh was driving his Porsche 930 Turbo through the quiet streets of New Jersey. The powerful sports car roared through the darkness as he headed home. For a moment, it was just another late-night drive after a long day. Then suddenly, tragedy struck. The high-performance car lost control and veered violently off the road. Within seconds, it slammed into a solid concrete wall with devastating force. The impact crushed the front of the vehicle, leaving the young hockey star critically injured. Emergency crews rushed him to the hospital, and doctors fought desperately to save his life. For hours, the hockey world held its breath. But the injuries were simply too severe. Shortly afterward, Pelle Lindbergh passed away. He was only 26 years old. The loss sent shockwaves through the NHL. Teammates, fans, and fellow players mourned the sudden loss of a man who had just reached the peak of his career. Only months earlier, he had led the Flyers to the Stanley Cup Final and been named the best goaltender in the league. Ryan Dunn. For fans of the wildly outrageous Jackass franchise, Ryan Dunn was more than just a stunt performer. He was the fearless spirit that made the show unforgettable. Known for his reckless humor, infectious laughter, and willingness to attempt the most insane stunts imaginable, Dunn quickly became one of the most beloved members of the Jackass crew. Audiences around the world watched in shock and amusement as he threw himself into dangerous situations with a grin on his face, proving again and again that nothing could scare him. But on the early morning of June 20th, 2011, the man who had cheated danger so many times faced a tragedy that no stunt team could prepare for. That night, Dunn had been out with friends at a bar in Westchester, Pennsylvania. After leaving the bar, he climbed behind the wheel of his powerful Porsche GT3, accompanied by his friend and Jackass No. 2 production assistant, Zachary Hartwell. The road stretched quietly through the darkness as they headed home. Then, in a terrifying moment, everything went wrong. Traveling at extremely high speed, Dunn lost control of the sports car. The Porsche veered violently off the road and slammed into a tree with devastating force. Within seconds, the vehicle burst into flames, lighting up the night sky in a horrific fire. When emergency crews arrived, the crash scene was almost unrecognizable. Both Ryan Dunn and Zachary Hartwell were killed in the fiery wreck. Dunn had turned 34 years old just 9 days earlier. Jessica Savage. In the fast-paced world of television journalism, Jessica Savage stood out as a true pioneer. At a time when women were still fighting for equal footing in broadcast news, Savage broke barriers and rose to become one of the first female anchors on a major American network. Intelligent, composed, and fearless in front of the camera, She quickly earned a reputation for handling complex stories with authority and grace. To millions of viewers, Jessica Savitch represented the future of television journalism. But behind the bright studio lights, her life was often filled with pressure, long hours, and relentless public scrutiny. Then, on the night of October 23, 1983, tragedy struck in the most unexpected way. Jessica was driving through the quiet town of New Hope, Pennsylvania, accompanied by her close friend, Martin Fishbein. The road ahead was narrow, dark, and winding, with rain making the pavement slick and dangerous. It should have been just another late-night drive. But in a single terrifying moment, everything changed. As the car moved along the road, it suddenly veered off course. Unable to regain control, the vehicle slid down an embankment and plunged into a nearby canal. Within seconds, the car disappeared beneath the dark water. Rescuers later arrived, but it was already too late. Both Jessica Savitch and Martin Fishbein were found inside the submerged vehicle. She was only 36 years old. The news shocked the nation. A brilliant journalist, a groundbreaking broadcaster, and a voice trusted by millions had been silenced far too soon. Colleagues and viewers alike mourned not only the loss of a talented reporter, but of a woman who had helped change the face of American television. Ernie Kovacs. In the early days of television, when the medium was still discovering its voice, one man was already years ahead of his time: Ernie Kovacs. Known for his wild imagination and fearless sense of humor, Kovacs helped reinvent television comedy. Instead of simple jokes and punchlines, he filled the screen with bizarre visual gags, surreal sketches, and clever experiments that no one had ever seen before. His style was unpredictable, inventive, and completely original. To audiences across America, Ernie Kovacs wasn't just funny. He was a genius pushing television into the future. But on the cold, early morning of January 13th, 1962, that brilliant mind would be lost forever. Kovacs was driving his Chevrolet Corvair station wagon through the quiet streets of West Los Angeles. The city was mostly asleep, the roads nearly empty. For a moment, everything seemed calm. Then suddenly, disaster. As Kovacs drove along the road, he lost control of the vehicle. The car skidded violently across the pavement and slammed straight into a power pole with devastating force. The impact was brutal. Kovacs was thrown from the vehicle, suffering severe head and chest injuries. Emergency responders rushed to the crash site, but there was nothing they could do. Ernie Kovacs was pronounced dead at the scene. He was only 42 years old. The loss sent shockwaves through the entertainment world. Television had lost one of its most daring innovators, a man whose creativity had reshaped what comedy on screen could be. Leon Bick's Beiderbecke. In the golden age of jazz, when smoky clubs echoed with the sound of trumpets and saxophones, few musicians shined as brightly as Leon Bick's Beiderbecke. A gifted jazz performer known for his remarkable musical talent and smooth, expressive sound, he helped shape the evolution of modern jazz during the 1940s. His performances were electric, yet deeply emotional, blending technical brilliance with a soulful style that inspired countless musicians who followed. To fans and fellow artists alike, he was more than a musician. He was part of the very heartbeat of jazz. But on October 27, 1941, that music would come to a sudden and tragic silence. That day, Beiderbecke was traveling along a highway near Kent, Ohio. The road stretched quietly ahead like countless drives musicians made while moving from one performance to the next. It should have been just another routine journey. Then, in a split second, everything changed. Without warning, another vehicle appeared in the opposite lane. The two cars collided head-on with devastating force. The violent impact crushed the front of the vehicles, sending twisted metal and shattered glass across the roadway. The injuries were catastrophic. Emergency responders rushed to the scene, but the damage was too severe. Leon Beiderbecke succumbed to his injuries almost instantly. He was only 33 years old. The jazz world was left in shock. A brilliant talent whose music had already begun influencing a new generation of performers was suddenly gone. His life ended far too soon, but the legacy of his sound continued to ripple through the world of jazz. Steve Allen. In the early days of American television, one man helped shape the very idea of late-night entertainment: Steve Allen. A brilliant comedian, musician, writer, and host, Allen became a household name in 1954 when he co-created and hosted the very first version of The Tonight Show. His quick wit, clever humor, and effortless charm made him one of the most beloved figures on television. Millions of viewers tuned in night after night watching as he helped invent the talk show format that would later dominate late-night TV for generations. But on October 30th, 2000, the legendary entertainer's life ended in a quiet and unexpected tragedy. That day, Allen was driving through Los Angeles to visit his youngest son. The trip should have been routine, just a short drive through familiar streets. But while traveling along the road, another driver suddenly backed out of a driveway and struck the side of Allen's car. The crash seemed minor. There was no dramatic explosion, no mangled wreckage, just a small accident that didn't appear serious at first. Allen continued on his way and eventually arrived at his son's home. But something inside his body had already gone terribly wrong. During the collision, Allen had unknowingly suffered a ruptured blood vessel. Feeling tired after the drive, he decided to lie down and take a nap. He never woke up. Steve Allen died peacefully in his sleep later that day, at the age of 78. They had fame, money, and millions watching their every move, but none of that could save them from the final crash. In a split second, flashing cameras, roaring crowds, and bright futures were swallowed by twisted metal fire and silence. These are the shocking deaths that left the world stunned. James Dean. James Dean wasn't just a rising star, he was rebellion with a heartbeat. At only 24, he had already become the face of restless youth, a Hollywood outsider with movie star looks, raw talent, and a dangerous love for speed. Audiences saw a legend in the making. No one knew they were also watching a man racing toward his final scene. On September 30th, 1955, Dean climbed into his silver Porsche 550 Spider, the car that would become forever linked to his name. He was headed for a race, chasing the thrill he loved as much as the spotlight itself. With mechanic Rolf Vutherick beside him and friends trailing behind, Dean tore down the California road, as if nothing in the world could touch him. Then in one savage instant, it all ended. A Ford turned into his path. Metal exploded, glass shattered. The young man who looked impossible to kill was suddenly broken in the wreckage. Dean was pronounced dead before the world had time to process what had happened. He didn't just die in a car crash, he became trapped in American myth. The bad boy, the beautiful rebel, the star who burned too hot and disappeared too fast. His life was short, but the image never faded. James Dean left the earth in twisted steel and silence, but the legend roared louder after death than it ever did in life. Anne Heche. Anne Heche didn't just die in a car crash, she vanished in a nightmare of fire, speed, and heartbreak that stunned all of Hollywood. One moment she was still a woman, the world remembered for her fearless spirit, wild honesty, and complicated life in the spotlight. The next, her car tore through a quiet Los Angeles neighborhood, like something out of a disaster film slamming into a home, and exploding into flames so massive it took dozens of firefighters to battle the inferno. But what made it even more devastating was that Anne didn't die instantly. She was pulled from the wreckage, fighting for life, trapped in that terrible space between survival and goodbye. For days, hope clung on by a thread as doctors worked, family prayed, and fans around the world watched in shock, unwilling to believe that such a vibrant, chaotic, unforgettable soul could be slipping away. Then came the crushing truth: Anne Heche was gone. Her death wasn't just another celebrity tragedy. It felt raw, cruel, and painfully human. Behind the headlines was a mother, a star, a woman who had spent years battling pain, scrutiny, love loss, and the weight of being misunderstood. In the end, the flames didn't just consume a car. They closed the final chapter on one of Hollywood's most troubled and fascinating lives, leaving behind grief, questions, and a silence that hit harder than anyone expected. Jayne Mansfield. Jayne Mansfield didn't just chase fame, she attacked it like a storm. With platinum hair, a scandalous image, and a smile built for flashbulbs, she became one of Hollywood's most explosive sex symbols. The world compared her to Marilyn Monroe, but Jayne was never content being anyone's shadow. She was louder, bolder, more provocative, an actress, a singer, a showgirl, and a mother, living inside a life that always felt one step away from chaos. Behind the curves, the headlines, and the laughter was a woman fighting to stay unforgettable in a town that devours women as fast as it worships them. By the summer of 1967, her career had cooled, but Jayne still knew how to command attention. Then came the night that turned her name into legend. On June 29th, after a nightclub appearance, she hit the road through the dark with her boyfriend, Sam Brody driver Ronnie Harrison, and 3 of her children asleep in the back seat. The highway ahead looked ordinary. It wasn't. A thick wall of darkness and haze swallowed the road as their car sped forward into the Louisiana night. Then, without warning, it slammed into the rear of a truck with catastrophic force. Steel folded, glass burst. In a single horrifying instant, glamour was ripped apart by violence. Jayne, Sam, and Ronnie were killed instantly. Her children, trapped in the back, somehow survived. What followed was almost as chilling as the crash itself. America didn't just mourn Jayne Mansfield. It turned her death into a nightmare wrapped in rumor. Stories spread that she had been decapitated, a gruesome myth fueled by the wreckage and the horror at the scene. Then came darker whispers, curses, omens, and the eerie legend linking her death to Anton LaVey. Whether true or not, the myths clung to her, because Jayne's life had always lived on the edge of spectacle. In death, she became something even more haunting, a symbol of Hollywood excess, fragile beauty, and the brutal truth that fame can disappear in one violent second on an empty road. Sam Kinison. Sam Kinison had spent years screaming his pain into microphones, turning rage, addiction, heartbreak, and chaos into comedy so explosive it made him a legend. But on one dark stretch of highway, the man whose voice could shake an arena was reduced to silence in an instant. He wasn't leaving a battlefield. He wasn't walking out of a scandal. He was simply on the road, heading toward another show, another night under the lights, until fate came speeding straight at him. The crash was violent, sudden, and merciless. A pickup truck crossed into his lane and smashed head-on into his vehicle, crushing metal glass and whatever future he still had left. In the aftermath, there was no applause, no laughter, no roaring crowd, only twisted wreckage, shock blood, and the horrible realization that one of comedy's wildest souls was slipping away on the side of the road. What makes Sam's death hit even harder is the cruel timing of it. He had already survived so much of his own destruction. The addictions, the self-inflicted ruin, the storms he brought into every room. And yet when it finally seemed possible that he might actually outrun the darkness, life cut him down anyway. That's what makes this tragedy feel so brutal. Sam Kinison didn't just die young. He died at the exact moment when people started to believe he still had more to become. Behind the outrageous persona was a man at war with himself, desperate to be loved, desperate to be heard, and maybe in the end, desperate for peace. His final exit was not just shocking, it was heartbreak in its rawest form, a survivor of his own chaos destroyed by a collision he never saw coming. Paul Walker. Paul Walker lived the kind of life most men only fantasize about. He had the face of a movie star, the soul of a wanderer, and the heart of a man who never stopped moving. To millions, he was Brian O'Connor, the cool, fearless speed demon from Fast and Furious. But off-screen Walker was more than a Hollywood icon. He was a father, a thrill-seeker, a man obsessed with cars, and someone who quietly gave his time and money to people in crisis. He looked like the kind of man who had outrun disaster his entire life. That's what made his ending feel so cruel, so impossible to believe. On November 30th, 2013, Walker attended a charity event for Reach Out Worldwide, the disaster relief organization he founded. It was supposed to be a good day, cars, friends, fans, and a purpose bigger than fame. After the event, he left with his close friend Roger Rodas, a former race car driver, and the man behind the wheel of a red Porsche Carrera GT. It should have been a short drive. Instead, it became a death sentence. Moments later, the Porsche lost control at terrifying speed, slammed into a curb, tore through trees and a light pole, and burst into flames with horrifying force. By the time anyone reached the wreck, there was almost nothing left to save. Paul Walker and Roger Rodas were both dead. The shock hit like an explosion across the world. Fans didn't just lose an actor, they lost a face that had come to symbolize loyalty, adrenaline, brotherhood, and freedom. The tragedy felt even darker because it mirrored the very world that made him famous: speed power, and the illusion that some men can dance with danger forever. But real life doesn't hand out second takes. It doesn't cut away before the crash. Paul Walker's death froze the world in one awful moment, twisted metal, fire, smoke, and silence where a heartbeat used to be. Lisa Left Eye Lopes. Lisa Left Eye Lopes had always lived like a storm, brilliant, unpredictable, wounded, and impossible to ignore. She wasn't just the fiery soul of TLC. She was a woman carrying pain, fame, rebellion, and a restless spirit that seemed forever caught between self-destruction and salvation. And in the final days of her life, that tension felt almost eerie, as if something dark was already circling her. She had gone to Honduras, searching for healing, for clarity, maybe even for peace. But instead of escape, what waited for her is a horrifying end on a lonely road. In a sudden burst of chaos, Lisa lost control of the SUV, swerving violently as the vehicle rolled and tore across the earth. Metal twisted. Bodies were thrown. And just like that, one of music's most unforgettable voices was gone at only 30 years old. What makes Lisa's death feel even more haunting is everything that surrounded it. There was already tragedy in the air, pain, guilt, strange coincidences, spiritual warnings, and the sense that she was trying desperately to outrun something inside herself. She wasn't just another celebrity caught in a fatal crash. She was a woman wrestling with demons the public could sense but never fully understand. That's why her death didn't just shock fans, it unsettled them. It felt bigger than an accident. It felt like the final chapter of a soul that had been burning too hard for too long. Behind the headlines was someone deeply human, fragile, intense, loving, reckless, and aching to be free. Lisa didn't leave the world quietly. She left behind questions, grief, and a silence that felt almost unnatural because voices like hers aren't supposed to disappear that fast. They're supposed to keep burning. They're supposed to survive. Bessie Smith. Bessie Smith didn't just sing the blues, she dragged pain into the light and made the world listen. Born into poverty, hardened by loss, and fueled by a voice that could shake the walls of any room, she rose to become the undisputed empress of the blues. She wasn't polished, delicate, or built for polite society. She was raw power. Every note she sang sounded lived in, torn from heartbreak, survival, and a life that refused to break quietly. By the time America knew her name, Bessie had already turned suffering into legend. But even legends can bleed. In September 1937, after years of fame, scandal, and relentless touring, Bessie was traveling through the Mississippi night with her companion Richard Morgan. The road was dark, the hour was cruel, and what happened next felt like the kind of ending no one would dare write for a woman who had fought so hard to be heard. Their car collided with a slow-moving truck, ripping open the journey in one violent instant. Metal screamed, glass shattered. Bessie was left catastrophically injured on the side of the road, her body broken, her future slipping away under the cold indifference of the night. But the tragedy did not end with the crash. It deepened. Around her final hours grew stories tangled with racism, neglect, and the brutal reality of America at the time. Rumors spread that treatment was delayed because she was black, turning her death into something even more haunting than an accident, a symbol of a country where talent could make you famous, but not necessarily safe. Whether in truth, myth, or the painful space between them, Bessie's end became larger than one wreck on one road. It became a wound in cultural memory. She died as she had lived, surrounded by hardship, shadow, and the sound of a world too cruel for a voice that powerful. And yet even death could not silence her. Because Bessie Smith left behind more than songs, she left behind a roar that still echoes long after the road went quiet. Princess Diana. Princess Diana didn't just die in a car crash, she disappeared into one of the most haunting nights the modern world has ever witnessed. She was the woman millions adored, the princess, who turned pain into grace, scandal into strength, and royal distance into human warmth. But on that final night in Paris, behind the flashing cameras and the desperate chase, the fairy tale shattered in the most brutal way imaginable. What began as another night under relentless public scrutiny became a nightmare of speed, steel, and terror. Diana's car raced into the darkness with paparazzi close behind, and in seconds, everything was destroyed inside a tunnel that would become infamous forever. The wreckage was catastrophic. The silence afterward was worse. The woman who had once seemed untouchable, photographed, followed, worshipped everywhere she went, was suddenly fragile, broken, and slipping away from the world that had never stopped watching her. That is what makes Diana's death feel so devastating, even decades later. It was not only tragic, it was cruelly symbolic. A woman hunted by attention until her very last breath. A mother, an icon, and a wounded soul who had spent years carrying humiliation, loneliness, and pressure beneath a perfectly composed smile. In the end, the world did not just lose a princess. It lost a living paradox, someone glamorous yet deeply lonely, powerful yet painfully vulnerable, adored by millions yet never fully protected. Her death sent shockwaves across continents because it felt bigger than loss. It felt like betrayal, the kind that leaves behind flowers, tears, conspiracy rage, and an ache that never fully fades. Diana's story didn't end like a legend should. It ended in shattered metal, blinding flashes, and a silence so heavy the whole world could feel it. Grace Kelly. Grace Kelly looked like she had stepped out of a dream the world never wanted to wake up from. She was elegance made flesh, cool, radiant, untouchable. Hollywood adored her. Directors framed her like a masterpiece. Audiences watched her with the kind of fascination reserved for women who seemed too perfect to belong to real life. Then she did the impossible. She walked away from fame, married Prince Rainier III, and became Princess Grace of Monaco, turning a movie star fantasy into a royal fairy tale. But the most beautiful stories often hide the darkest endings. By September 1982, Grace was no longer just a screen legend. She was a wife, a mother, a princess, and a woman carrying the quiet weight of a life lived under constant public gaze. On September 13th, she left the family's country home with her daughter, Princess Stephanie, and began the drive back to Monaco, along the steep, winding roads above the coast. It should have been an ordinary return home. Instead, it became the final, terrifying descent of an icon. Somewhere along that narrow mountain road, Grace reportedly suffered a medical episode behind the wheel. In an instant, control was gone. The car veered off the roadway and plunged down the rocky hillside below. Steel crumpled, glass shattered. The fairy tale broke open in silence and violence. Stephanie survived. Grace did not. She was pulled from the wreck alive but gravely injured. Her body devastated, her future already slipping away. The woman once lit by flashbulbs and palace chandeliers now lay at the center of a tragedy too cruel, too cinematic, too brutal to feel real. And as always happens when legends fall, rumors came crawling in behind the grief. Questions, whispers, speculation about what truly happened inside that car. But no rumor could outshine the heartbreak of the truth. One of the most admired women in the world was gone, not on a red carpet, not in front of a camera, but on a lonely curve of road. Grace Kelly lived like a fantasy, but she died in a nightmare, leaving behind a shattered kingdom of sorrow and a final image the world has never forgotten. Cliff Burton. Cliff Burton didn't die under stadium lights or in the glorious chaos of a final encore. He died in the freezing dark, thrown from a tour bus, and crushed in a nightmare so sudden, so brutal, it still feels unreal decades later. He was only 24, young, brilliant, and already the soul of Metallica, the rare musician whose bass didn't just support the music, it gave it teeth, depth, and a kind of dangerous beauty no one else could fake. That night in Sweden was supposed to be nothing more than another stop on a hard, relentless tour. Another road, another ride, another chapter in the rise of a band that seemed destined to conquer the world. But somewhere in that cold silence, fate turned vicious. The bus lost control, skidded and flipped, hurling Cliff out into the dark before the vehicle came crashing down on top of him. In seconds, one of metal's brightest young minds was gone, not in a blaze of glory, but in twisted steel, black ice, and horror. What makes Cliff's death so haunting is not just how violent it was, but how much future died with him. He wasn't simply a bassist. He was the creative force pushing Metallica beyond speed and aggression into something deeper, darker, and unforgettable. His talent felt limitless. His instincts were fearless. And that is what makes the loss so cruel, the sense that the world never got to see how far he could have gone. For the band, it wasn't just an accident. It was an emotional detonation. A brother was gone. A piece of their identity was ripped out on the side of a foreign road. And for fans, Cliff Burton became more than a musician. He became a ghost in heavy metal history, a symbol of raw genius, taken too fast, too young, and in a way so merciless, it still hurts to imagine. Aaliyah. Aaliyah didn't leave the world. In scandal, chaos, or decline, she was taken at the exact moment her future looked unstoppable. She was young, radiant, untouchably cool, and already evolving from music icon into something even bigger. Her voice was soft, but her presence was powerful. She didn't need to scream to own a room. That's what made her loss feel so cruel. She wasn't fading. She was ascending. On that final trip back from the Bahamas, what should have been a simple flight home turned into a nightmare no one saw coming. Minutes after takeoff, the plane went down in a violent, catastrophic crash, killing Aaliyah and everyone else on board. There was no time for goodbyes, no final performance, no slow farewell. Just wreckage, fire, shock, and the unbearable collapse of a life still filled with momentum. What made Aaliyah's death hit so hard was the innocence of it. She wasn't a star known for self-destruction. She wasn't spiraling in public. She was disciplined, elegant, and deeply admired, with an image built not on scandal, but on mystery, grace, and quiet power. That's why the tragedy felt so unfair. It didn't feel like the ending of a troubled celebrity story. It felt like the violent interruption of something beautiful that had only just begun. Behind the fame was a daughter, an artist, and a young woman whose calm exterior hid fierce ambition and enormous potential. Her death didn't just shock the music world, it left a wound in pop culture that never fully closed. Because some losses feel bigger than death. They feel like stolen futures. And Aaliyah became exactly that, a shining star, frozen forever, at the moment the world was ready to see how far she could truly go. Naya Rivera. Naya Rivera didn't die in a blaze of headlines. At first she vanished into silence, and somehow that made it even more terrifying. To the world, she was fierce, magnetic, and impossible to ignore, a woman whose confidence could light up a screen and cut through a room in seconds. But in the end, there were no cameras close enough, no audience, no warning. Just open water, a drifting boat, and a disappearance that turned into one of Hollywood's most heartbreaking tragedies. What made it so devastating was the cruel simplicity of it. This wasn't a high-speed crash or a public meltdown. It was a quiet day on the lake with her young son, something ordinary, something innocent, something that should have ended with laughter and a safe return to shore. Instead, it became a nightmare. Her son was found alone on the boat, waiting while Naya was gone. And in that single detail, the tragedy became almost unbearable. The actress millions knew as bold and fearless spent her final moments making sure her child survived. That is why Naya's death cut so deeply. It wasn't only shocking, it was profoundly human. Beneath the fame was a mother, and in the final chapter of her life, that identity mattered more than anything else. She didn't leave behind scandal as much as sorrow. Not spectacle, but sacrifice. And that made the loss feel heavier than most celebrity deaths ever do. Naya Rivera's story ended not with applause, but with still water, unanswered cries, and a silence that broke people's hearts. She was taken far too soon, but in the most painful way possible. Her final act revealed exactly who she was: brave, loving, and unforgettable. Hey, thrill seekers, step into the moment where control slips and everything changes in a heartbeat. Tonight, we're not chasing adrenaline, we're confronting the dark side of it. One drink too many, one reckless choice, and suddenly, the night fractures into sirens, shattered glass, and lives that will never be the same again. These aren't just stories, they're real, raw, and devastating. Think it won't happen to you? Think again. Because once the line is crossed, there's no undoing what comes next. Lane Garrison. December 2nd, 2006, Beverly Hills, where bright lights, fast lives, and second chances collide. Lane Garrison was only 26, fresh off the success of a hit TV show, finally stepping into the spotlight he had chased for years. That night, it didn't feel like a warning. It felt like freedom. Music parties, strangers turning into friends. It was the kind of night that seems harmless until it isn't. Outside a liquor store, Lane met three teenagers. They were young, curious, drawn to the energy surrounding him. What started as a casual encounter quickly turned into something more dangerous. Alcohol was passed around. Boundaries blurred. And as the night moved forward, the line between responsibility and recklessness quietly disappeared. No one stopped to think about where this was heading. At some point, they all got into his SUV. The city lights stretched across the road ahead, but control was already slipping away. Investigators would later reveal that Lane had been drinking and using substances before getting behind the wheel. In his mind, he was still in charge. But reality doesn't wait for you to catch up. In a sudden, irreversible moment, the vehicle left the road and slammed into a tree. Silence followed, heavy, permanent, unforgiving. A 17-year-old boy, Vahang Setian, who had his entire future ahead of him, didn't survive. Two young girls in the back seat were left seriously injured, their lives forever altered. And Lane, once rising in Hollywood, now faced a completely different reality, one defined not by fame, but by consequences. What makes this story hit harder is how ordinary it began. No plan for destruction, no intention to harm, just a series of small, careless decisions stacking up until there was no way back. Because sometimes the most dangerous thing isn't the crash. It's the belief that nothing bad will happen before it does. Ryan Dunn. June 20th, 2011, long after midnight in Pennsylvania, the road stretched out empty and silent. The kind of road that invites speed and dares you to push limits. Ryan Dunn knew that feeling better than most. He built a career on risk, on doing what others wouldn't dare, on turning danger into entertainment. That night felt no different. Drinks had been poured, laughter shared, and somewhere between confidence and carelessness, a line was crossed. He got behind the wheel of a high-performance car, a machine built for precision, but unforgiving in the wrong hands. Beside him sat his friend Zachary Hartwell, someone who trusted the moment, trusted the driver, trusted that they would make it home. The engine roared to life, and within seconds, speed took over. What starts as control can disappear faster than anyone expects, especially when judgment is already blurred. Investigators later revealed just how fast the car was moving, far beyond what the road could safely handle. In a single instant, that speed turned into something else entirely. The vehicle left the road, and what followed was not just a crash, but a complete loss of control that ended everything where it stood. Two lives, two stories, both cut off in the same moment, leaving behind shock, grief, and questions that would never fully be answered. What makes this story so unsettling is not just the outcome, but the pattern behind it. This was not the first warning, not the first risky decision, not the first time speed and alcohol had mixed. But like so many others, it felt manageable until it wasn't. Keith Moon, January 4th, 1970. A small pub in England filled with noise, laughter, and the kind of energy that comes from a night meant to celebrate. Keith Moon, the legendary drummer of The Who, was there, not as a global rock icon, but as a guest supporting a local opening. Still, wherever he went, attention followed. His presence, his attitude, his lifestyle, it all stood out. And as the night went on, so did the tension around him. Alcohol flowed freely, and the atmosphere slowly shifted. What started as celebration turned uneasy as a group in the crowd grew hostile. Words, looks, and quiet resentment built into something more aggressive. Sensing the situation changing, Moon and his group decided to leave. It should have ended there. Just another wild night, nothing more. But outside, the chaos was waiting. As they reached the car, the situation escalated fast. The vehicle was surrounded, shaken, struck, turning a retreat into panic. In that moment, decisions were no longer calm or calculated. They were instinctive. Moon, not known for driving and not prepared for the situation, took the wheel in an attempt to escape. Fear replaced logic. Urgency replaced awareness. What happened next unfolded in confusion and darkness. In the attempt to get away, his bodyguard Neil Boland was caught in the chaos behind the car. By the time everything stopped, the celebration had turned into tragedy. A life was lost, not through intention, but through a chain of fear, pressure, and split-second reactions that no one could take back. The court would later rule it an accident, but not everyone accepted that conclusion. Questions lingered, doubts remained, and for Keith Moon, the weight of that night never truly disappeared. Those close to him believed it changed something deep inside, pushing him further into the same reckless patterns he was already known for. Vince Neil. December 8, 1984 was supposed to be the beginning of something big. Hanoi Rocks had finally broken into the American scene, their momentum building their future wide open. That night, music, laughter, and alcohol filled the air inside a California beach house. It felt like celebration, like success finally within reach. But sometimes the moment everything seems to be coming together is the exact moment it all starts to fall apart. As the night went on, the drinking didn't stop. When the alcohol ran out, Vince Neil, frontman of Motley Crue, made a decision that felt small at the time, just a quick drive to get more. He grabbed his keys. Razzle, the band's charismatic drummer, jumped in the passenger seat. No one thought twice. No one stopped them. And in that ordinary, careless moment, the future quietly shifted. The streets were dark, the car moving fast, and control began to slip. What happened next unfolded in seconds but echoed for decades. A sudden collision. A violent stop. Silence where there should have been music. Razzle, full of life just moments earlier, was gone. In another vehicle, two young people were left with devastating injuries that would follow them forever. For Vince Neil, the consequences came quickly, but for many, they never felt enough. Legal outcomes can be measured in days, months, or money. But the weight of a life lost that lingers in a different way. The music world paused, fans mourned, and a rising band lost its heartbeat before it ever reached its peak. What makes this story so unsettling isn't just the tragedy, it's how easily it began. Not with anger, not with intent. Just a simple choice made in a moment of confidence under the illusion that nothing would go wrong. But sometimes the most dangerous lies we believe are the ones that tell us we're still in control. Amy Locane. On the night of June 27, 2010, in a quiet New Jersey neighborhood, everything looked painfully normal. Fred and Helen Seaman had just returned from a weekend away and were slowly turning into their driveway only a few feet from home when an approaching car came in far too fast. In one instant, the calm was shattered. What should have been the safest part of their journey became the moment that changed everything forever. Behind the wheel was Amy Locane, a former actress once known for her Hollywood promise and television fame. Years earlier, she had stood in front of cameras, admired for her talent and charm. But that night, the spotlight was gone, replaced by flashing emergency lights and the sound of consequences closing in. Investigators later found that she had been drinking heavily and driving at a dangerous speed through a residential area where families expected peace, not disaster. What makes the story so haunting is not just the crash itself, but the chain of choices leading up to it. Witnesses had noticed signs that she was impaired. There had been chances to stop, chances to hand over the keys, chances to make one responsible decision. Instead, the night kept moving forward until there was no way to take anything back. Helen Seaman lost her life, and Fred was left to survive the kind of loss no courtroom can truly measure. For Amy Locane, that single night erased any clear line between celebrity and accountability. The case dragged through the courts for years, becoming a lasting reminder that fame does not shield anyone from the weight of reckless decisions. And that is what makes this story impossible to ignore. It did not begin with violence or chaos. It began with someone believing they could still stay in control right up until the moment control was gone. Marco Mozzo, September 27, 2015. A calm Sunday afternoon in Ontario. The kind of day where nothing feels dangerous and everything feels routine. Inside a family minivan, the Neville Lake family was enjoying a simple outing. 3 young children in the back, their laughter filling the quiet space. It was an ordinary moment, the kind people never think twice about, because nothing about it suggested that within seconds, their lives would be torn apart in a way no one could ever repair. At the same time, Marco Muzzo was returning from a bachelor party, carrying the aftermath of hours of heavy drinking. He had continued drinking even on the flight home, fully aware that he was not in any condition to drive. But awareness did not stop him. Somewhere between confidence and recklessness, he made a decision that would define everything that followed. He got behind the wheel of his Jeep and entered a residential intersection without slowing down. What happened next unfolded with brutal finality. Driving at high speed, he ran through a stop sign and collided directly into the side of the minivan. The force of the crash turned a peaceful afternoon into a scene of chaos and irreversible loss. Emergency responders arrived quickly, doing everything possible, but some moments are beyond saving. 3 children lost their lives along with their grandfather. 2 others survived, but with injuries that would forever remind them of that day. In the aftermath, the shock spread far beyond the crash site. A mother was left to face the unimaginable reality of losing her children in a single moment. A community struggled to understand how such a preventable tragedy could happen. And at the center of it all was one undeniable truth. This was not fate or chance. It was a choice made despite knowing the risk. Samuel Davidson. February 1st, 2020, a quiet suburban street in Sydney. The kind of place where children walk freely and families feel safe without thinking twice. That afternoon, a group of kids stepped out together, heading to a nearby shop for ice cream. It was simple, innocent, and ordinary. Laughter, footsteps, sunlight on the pavement. Nothing about that moment hinted at danger approaching at high speed, just seconds away. Behind the wheel of a blue Mitsubishi, Samuel Davidson had already crossed multiple lines long before reaching that street. From early morning, he had been drinking heavily, mixing alcohol with other substances, gradually losing any clear sense of judgment. Witnesses would later describe his driving as chaotic, speeding, swerving, ignoring traffic signals as if the rules no longer applied to him. By the time he entered the residential area, control was already slipping beyond recovery. As the road curved downhill, his speed climbed far above what the street could handle. In a place designed for safety, his vehicle became a threat no one could escape. In a single devastating moment, he lost control and mounted the curb, striking the group of children from behind. The impact changed everything instantly. 4 young lives were gone and others were left injured, their futures permanently altered by a decision they had no part in. What followed was a wave of grief that spread across an entire nation. Families were left with questions no answer could satisfy, and a community struggled to process how something so preventable could become so final. Yet within that pain, something unexpected emerged. The father of 3 of the victims chose to speak not with anger, but with forgiveness, a response that stunned many and challenged how people understood justice. Olivia Culbreth. February 9th, 2014, just before dawn in California, the freeway stretched out in the darkness, carrying early drivers toward another ordinary day. Inside one vehicle, a family of 4 was traveling together, unaware that within moments, everything would change. At the same time, in the opposite direction, Olivia Culbreth made a decision that had already crossed the line between risk and disaster. She had been drinking, and despite knowing the danger, she got behind the wheel. What makes this moment even more unsettling is how fast it escalated. Driving at extreme speed, she entered the freeway going the wrong way, turning a routine road into a path of unavoidable impact. Calls began flooding emergency lines, drivers reporting a car heading directly into oncoming traffic. There was no time to react, no space to escape. In seconds, 2 paths collided with devastating force, ending multiple lives in a single instant. The aftermath was overwhelming. A family was lost together, their journey ending where it should have been safest. Others caught in the crash were left injured, confused, trying to understand what had just happened. Olivia survived, but survival came with consequences far beyond physical wounds. She became the only one left to face the reality of that night, a reality shaped by one decision made under the influence. As the case unfolded, the focus was not only on the crash itself, but on the pattern behind it. Prior warnings, previous violations, moments where things could have changed direction. Yet none of them were enough to stop what eventually happened. Stephen Schwally. June 28, 2024. A warm Friday afternoon in Long Island, where people moved through their day without a second thought. Inside a busy nail salon, conversations flowed, phones buzzed, and customers relaxed in their chairs, preparing for the weekend ahead. Among them was an off-duty police officer getting ready for a wedding later that evening. It was the kind of ordinary moment that feels completely safe, completely routine. Until, without warning, that sense of normal disappeared. Outside, Stephen Schwally was already on a different path. Earlier that day, he had been drinking, continuing a pattern that had followed him for years. Witnesses later described his driving as erratic, fast, and unpredictable, as if control was no longer part of the equation. Still, he kept going. Through parking lots, past pedestrians, ignoring the quiet rhythm of the area around him, moving closer to a moment that could no longer be avoided. Then it happened. His vehicle left the roadway at high speed and surged directly into the salon. In a single instant, the space that once felt calm and ordinary became a scene of chaos. People had no time to react, no chance to understand what was happening before everything changed. Lives were lost, others were seriously injured, and the impact reached far beyond the walls of that building. In the aftermath, questions came quickly, but answers felt incomplete. Witnesses spoke of the speed, the warning signs, the behavior that suggested something was wrong long before the crash. And yet, none of it was enough to stop what followed. Nicholas Devon Robinson. February 21st, 2025, just after midnight in Miami Beach. The city was still alive with music lights and late-night traffic. On the side of the MacArthur Causeway, a young college student, Gabriela Flores, sat inside her disabled Jeep waiting for help. Moments earlier, a police officer had assisted her in moving the vehicle out of traffic. It should have been a safe pause, a brief delay before continuing her night. Nothing about that moment suggested how quickly everything was about to change. Not far away, Nicholas Devon Robinson was celebrating his birthday, moving between bars, drinking, and stepping further away from clear judgment with each passing hour. At some point, he made the same decision seen in so many tragedies before him. He chose to drive. Witnesses would later describe a car moving at extreme speed, far beyond what the road allowed, cutting through the night with no regard for what lay ahead. As Robinson approached the causeway, the situation escalated in seconds. His vehicle veered, struck a divider, and continued forward with unstoppable force. Gabriela's Jeep, stationary and out of traffic, suddenly became the center of impact. In an instant, a moment of waiting turned into a life-ending collision. Emergency crews responded immediately, but some outcomes cannot be reversed once they begin. In the aftermath, confusion surrounded Robinson's behavior. Officers noted signs of impairment, while witnesses struggled to process what they had just seen. For Gabriela's friends who had been standing nearby, the loss was immediate and deeply personal. A young woman focused on her future, her education, her life ahead was gone because of a decision she had no control over. Rebecca Grossman. September 29th, 2020, a quiet evening in Westlake Village, California, where families walked together under the fading light. Two young boys, Mark and Jacob Iskander, were crossing the street with their parents just steps away from home. It was the kind of moment that feels completely safe, completely routine. But safety can disappear in seconds when someone else decides the rules don't apply. Behind the wheel, Rebecca Grossman, a well-known socialite, had been drinking earlier that night. Witnesses later described two speeding vehicles racing down the road, engines roaring through a residential area where children lived and played. In that moment, speed and alcohol combined into something far more dangerous than either alone. As her vehicle approached the crossing, there was no time to react. The impact came suddenly, violently, and without warning. The two boys were struck in a place meant to protect them. A family outing turned into a scene no parent should ever have to face. The neighborhood fell silent, replaced by shock sirens and disbelief. In the aftermath, the case drew national attention, not just because of who she was, but because of the choices that led there. Questions of accountability, privilege, and responsibility surfaced again and again. Because when power meets recklessness, the consequences don't disappear. They echo louder. Matthew Broderick. August 5th, 1987. A narrow road in Northern Ireland, where visibility was limited and the margin for error was thin. Actor Matthew Broderick was driving a rental car during a vacation, accompanied by actress Jennifer Grey. It was supposed to be a quiet getaway, far from cameras and attention. But even in the calmest settings, one mistake can change everything. Driving on unfamiliar roads, Broderick drifted into the wrong lane. In a place where every second matters, that small lapse became critical. An oncoming vehicle approached with no space to avoid what was about to happen. In an instant, two paths crossed in the worst possible way. The collision resulted in the deaths of two women in the other vehicle, a mother and daughter whose lives ended on a road they had traveled many times before. What makes this case so haunting is how quickly a simple driving error turned into a permanent loss for an entire family. Broderick later faced legal consequences, but the incident remained tied to his name for decades. It stands as a reminder that not all tragedies begin with recklessness alone. Sometimes it's a combination of inexperience, pressure, and a momentary lapse that leads to irreversible outcomes. Laura Bush. November 6, 1963. A quiet intersection in Midland, Texas, long before the world would know her name. Laura Bush, then a teenager, was driving through a familiar area, a place she had likely passed through many times before. It was an ordinary day, the kind that never feels significant until something changes it forever. As she approached the intersection, she failed to stop at a stop sign. At that exact moment, another vehicle entered the crossing. The collision that followed was sudden and unavoidable. Inside that vehicle was a close friend from her own community, someone whose life ended in that single moment. What makes this story deeply human is not just the event itself, but the weight it carried afterward. Laura Bush rarely spoke about it publicly, but those close to her, they understood the lasting emotional impact. A single mistake made in a familiar place became something she carried quietly for years. This case reminds us that tragedy does not always come from extreme behavior. Sometimes it comes from a moment of inattention, a missed sign a second too late. And in that second, everything changes in ways that can never be undone. Motorcycles promise freedom raw, untamed, intoxicating. But in the blink of an eye, that freedom can twist into something far darker. A missed second, a hidden danger, a single mistake. What begins as adrenaline becomes silence. These are not just accidents, they are final moments captured between speed and fate. Real riders, real lives. And the terrifying truth, sometimes the road doesn't forgive. Joy Harris. The moment progress met a fatal flaw. The set was ready, the cameras were in position, and everything looked controlled. In downtown Vancouver, Joy Harris stood beside the motorcycle that would carry her into one of the biggest moments of her life. She wasn't just another stunt performer. She was a pioneer, the first Black woman licensed as a professional road racer in her field, stepping into a spotlight that had rarely made room for someone like her. This was more than a job. It was history in motion. But behind the excitement, there was a quiet tension. Stunt riding wasn't racing. It demanded precision under pressure, repetition, and perfect coordination with a full production team. The scene itself seemed simple: ride forward, hit the mark, stop. She had done it before in rehearsal. Everything should have gone exactly the same. But there were differences. A different bike, a different environment, and one critical detail missing. When the cameras rolled, Joy accelerated as planned, moving down the ramp with control. For a brief moment, everything looked right. Then something didn't. The stop never came. The motorcycle kept moving, carrying her past the intended mark and into a space that was never meant to be part of the scene. In that instant, the line between performance and reality disappeared. What followed shocked the entire industry. Not because the stunt was extreme, but because it wasn't. This wasn't about pushing limits, it was about the smallest gap in preparation, the smallest overlooked detail, and in a world built on precision, that gap was all it took. Barry Oakley, the echo of a loss he never escaped. Some roads carry more than traffic. They carry memory. And on a quiet street in Macon, Georgia, Barry Oakley rode through one that already held a ghost. Just a year earlier, his closest friend and bandmate had died in a motorcycle crash only blocks away. That loss never left him. It followed him into rehearsals, into silence, into every note he played. Those who knew him said something had changed, that he was no longer fully present, like part of him had been left behind. Barry wasn't just a musician. He was the pulse of a legendary band, a bassist who didn't just support the music, but shaped it. His playing was alive, unpredictable, full of emotion. But off stage, the weight of grief had begun to take hold. Friends noticed the distance, the quiet shift in his energy. It was as if he was moving forward in life, but looking backward at the same time. That day, as he rode through a familiar stretch of road, nothing seemed unusual. No crowd, no cameras, no pressure. Just another ride. Until suddenly, something went wrong. A turn misjudged, a moment too late to correct. The impact came fast, but what followed was even more unsettling. He didn't think it was serious. He walked away at first, refusing help, as if the danger hadn't fully reached him yet. But some damage doesn't show itself right away. Hours later, the reality caught up, and in a twist that felt almost impossible to ignore, his story ended in nearly the same place at the same age as the friend he could never stop mourning. Some say it was coincidence. Others say it was something deeper. Either way, Barry Oakley didn't just lose control on that road. He crossed paths with a past he never truly escaped. Pete Conrad, the man who walked on the moon, stopped by a single turn. He had gone farther than most people could even imagine. Pete Conrad wasn't just a rider, he was an astronaut, a man who had stood on the moon and looked back at Earth from a distance few would ever experience. He had faced danger in the most extreme environments, made split-second decisions in space, and returned safely. If anyone understood risk, it was him. Yet back on Earth, on an ordinary day, he chose something simple, a ride through open roads, surrounded by friends with nothing but calm skies ahead. Everything about that moment felt controlled. The road curved gently, the speed was safe, and there was no sign of danger. It wasn't a challenge, not a test, not a mission, just a quiet ride. But sometimes the most unexpected moments carry the greatest consequences. In a single instant, something shifted. A small loss of balance, a change too subtle to predict, and the control he had relied on was gone. No warning, no time to correct. At first, it didn't seem final. He was still conscious, still present, as if the moment could pass like any other. But some impacts take time to reveal their weight. Hours later, everything changed. It's difficult to accept that a man who survived the vast unknown of space could be brought down by something so ordinary. Not by the dangers beyond Earth, but by a single turn on a quiet road reminding us that sometimes the smallest moments carry the greatest risk. Butch Laswell. The jump that went 1 inch too far. The crowd was massive. The cameras were rolling, and every eye was locked on a single ramp under the Nevada sun. Butch Laswell stood beside his motorcycle, calm on the outside but carrying the weight of expectation. He wasn't just another stunt rider. He was a record breaker, a man who had flown through the air thousands of times and made danger look precise, almost predictable. For him, this jump was more than a performance. It was a statement, a chance to go higher, farther, and prove once again that limits were meant to be pushed. But there was one thing no one could fully control: the wind. It moved quietly across the open space, just strong enough to matter, just subtle enough to ignore. Backing out wasn't an option, not with the crowd, the cameras, and history waiting. When the moment came, the engine roared and he accelerated down the ramp faster than planned. In an instant, he was airborne, clearing the massive gap with what looked like perfect control. But perfection has no margin for error. As he descended, something shifted just slightly. A small drift, barely visible, but enough. The landing point slipped out of alignment by the smallest distance imaginable. And in a sport where everything depends on precision, that tiny difference changed everything. The crowd went silent. In a career built on control, it wasn't a huge mistake that ended it, just one moment, one adjustment, 1 inch too far. Olga Pronina, the queen of speed who tempted the edge. On a warm summer afternoon in Vladivostok, the streets felt calm, almost harmless. But for Olga Pronina, they were never just roads. They were her stage. Known online to hundreds of thousands, she didn't simply ride, she performed, turning every moment into a display of fearless control. Standing on the seat, riding one-handed at high speed, smiling into the wind like nothing could touch her. To her followers, Olga wasn't just a biker. She was freedom in motion, bold, confident, untouchable. But beneath that image was something far more fragile. Riding wasn't only about thrill, it was her escape. A way to outrun silence, to fight through loneliness, to feel alive when life felt heavy. With every new stunt she pushed further, chasing that feeling again and again. And somewhere along the way, the line between control and risk quietly disappeared. That day, everything seemed perfect. Clear skies, dry roads, nothing out of place. Oh, until suddenly something was. No warning, no second chance. In a single moment, control slipped away. The woman who looked like she had mastered danger faced the one moment she couldn't outrun. And just like that, the road she loved the most became the place where her story came to an end. Alex Harville, the jump that was never meant to be the last. The crowd gathered under the wide open sky, engines echoing across the airfield as anticipation built with every passing second. Alex Harville wasn't just another rider warming up. He was a record breaker, a man who had spent his entire life chasing distance, speed, and perfection. From the time he was a child, 2 wheels were all he knew. And on that day, he stood on the edge of something bigger than ever before, a chance to push beyond limits once again. But before the main event, there was one simple step, a short test jump, routine, controlled, something he had done countless times. His family watched from the stands, his wife holding their children, believing this was just another moment in a long journey of success. As Alex accelerated, everything looked exactly as it should. The approach was clean, the timing precise, the takeoff smooth. For a brief moment, it felt like just another perfect run. Then something changed. The distance didn't line up. The landing wasn't where it needed to be. In an instant, the perfect setup turned into something no one expected. The crowd fell silent as reality replaced anticipation. It wasn't the record-breaking jump that defined that day, but the one that came before it. The one that was supposed to be safe. Sometimes the moment you least worry about is the one that changes everything. Kim Thompson. The ride that ended in a moment no one saw coming. It was just another ride. No crowd, no cameras, no record to break. Kim Thompson wasn't chasing fame or adrenaline that day, just the simple freedom that comes with being on the road. The kind of moment riders know well, where the world feels quiet, controlled, almost predictable. Nothing about it felt dangerous. Nothing suggested it would be anything more than an ordinary journey. But the road has a way of changing without warning. Somewhere along the route, something shifted. Not dramatically, not loudly, just enough to matter. A small detail, easy to miss, the kind of thing riders pass by every day without a second thought. And then, in a single instant, everything unraveled. The control that felt so certain moments before was gone, replaced by a situation no one could fully understand until it was already too late. What makes stories like this so unsettling isn't just the outcome. It's how normal everything felt right before. No risk, no warning signs, no reason to expect anything different. Just a quiet ride that turned into something else entirely. Because sometimes the most dangerous moments aren't the ones you fear, they're the ones you never see coming. Burak Khan Tashan. The night where 1 second changed everything. The road was quiet, wrapped in the kind of stillness that only comes after dark. Streetlights flickered across the pavement, and everything felt routine, almost predictable. Burak Khan Tashan was just another rider moving through the night, not chasing anything extreme, not trying to prove anything. Just a simple ride, the kind people take without thinking twice. But night roads carry their own kind of uncertainty. Somewhere ahead, something shifted. Maybe it was timing, maybe it was visibility. Maybe it was just one of those moments no one can fully explain. The kind that doesn't feel dangerous until it's already happening. In a split second, the calm was gone. The familiar road turned into something else entirely, and control slipped away faster than anyone could react. What makes moments like this so haunting is how ordinary they begin. No warning signs, no build-up, no sense of danger. Just a normal night, a normal ride, and then something changes. 1 second separates everything that was from everything that follows. And sometimes that single second is all it takes to rewrite the ending. Indian Larry. The legend who lived on the edge of control. The crowd wasn't just watching a stunt. They were watching a legend. Indian Larry had built his name on doing what others wouldn't even attempt, riding wild, custom-built motorcycles with no fear, no limits, and often no hands on the handlebars. To him, control wasn't something you held tightly. It was something you balanced on the edge of chaos. That day felt no different. The energy was high, the audience close, and every move he made carried that same raw confidence people had come to expect. He climbed onto his bike not to simply ride, but to perform. As the engine roared, he shifted his weight, pushing the limits of balance, turning a machine into something almost alive beneath him. For a moment, it looked effortless, like he had done it 1,000 times before. But the edge he danced on had no safety net. In a split second, something broke in the rhythm. A slight miscalculation, a shift too far, and the balance was gone. What had looked like complete control revealed its true nature, fragile, unpredictable. The crowd didn't understand it at first. It happened too fast. And that's what made it so haunting. A man who built his life mastering danger was undone by the very thing he trusted most. Sometimes, living on the edge doesn't give you a second chance. Nicky Hayden, the champion caught in a moment no one expected. He was known as the Kentucky Kid, a world champion, who had mastered speed at the highest level. Nicky Hayden lived where others only dreamed of being, racing at incredible speeds, making split-second decisions, and walking away from moments that most couldn't survive. Control was his identity. Precision was his instinct. On the track, he was nearly untouchable. But this wasn't the track. On a quiet road in Italy, Nicky was doing something simple, riding his bicycle far from the noise of engines and competition. It was supposed to be a break, a moment away from the intensity that defined his career. The road seemed calm, almost routine, nothing like the high-stakes world he came from. But sometimes it's the quiet moments that carry the greatest unpredictability. Then, in a single instant, everything changed. What followed wasn't about speed or racing skill. It was about timing, environment, and a situation no one could fully control. The calm shattered without warning, turning an ordinary ride into something irreversible. The world that knew him as a champion was left stunned, not because he faced danger, but because it came when no one expected it. A man who had spent his life mastering risk was caught in a moment where skill couldn't intervene. And that's what makes it so haunting. Not the intensity, not the speed, but the simplicity of how quickly everything can change when you least expect it. Marco Simoncelli, the race that changed in a fraction of a second. The track was alive with energy engines screaming as riders pushed themselves to the absolute limit. Among them was Marco Simoncelli, a rising star known not just for his talent, but for his fearless style. He didn't ride cautiously. He rode with intensity, leaning deeper, pushing harder, always chasing that perfect line between control and chaos. Fans loved him for it. Competitors respected him for it. That day felt like any other race. Fast, aggressive, unpredictable. Marco was right where he belonged, in the middle of the action, fighting for position, fully locked into the rhythm of the race. Every turn, every movement, every decision happening in fractions of a second. It was the world he understood completely. Until one moment broke that rhythm. Mid-corner, something shifted. The bike lost its line just slightly, but enough to matter. In racing, there's no pause button, no space to reset. Everything unfolds instantly. What looked like a minor instability became something far more serious as the situation escalated beyond control. The race didn't stop, it couldn't. And that's what makes it so haunting. A rider who lived on the edge of precision, undone by a moment no one could fully predict. Not a reckless move, not a clear mistake, just a split second where everything aligned in the worst possible way. On a track where control is everything, sometimes even that isn't enough. Duane Allman, the turn that no one could undo. The road looked ordinary, almost forgettable. Just another stretch of pavement in Macon, Georgia, where the day moved like any other. But for Duane Allman, nothing about life was ever ordinary. He was a musical force, a guitarist whose sound carried emotion, power, and something almost untouchable. On stage, he controlled every note. Off stage, he carried that same intensity into everything he did. That day, he was riding through familiar streets, the kind you don't think twice about. No crowd, no spotlight, just movement and instinct. Everything felt routine. Until suddenly, it wasn't. A vehicle appeared ahead, stopping in a way that left almost no time to react. In that split second, the space between control and chaos disappeared. What happened next unfolded faster than thought. A quick decision, an attempt to avoid the impossible, and then the moment was gone. The road, once quiet, became the center of something no one could reverse. Those who knew him would later struggle to understand how something so simple could change everything. Not a high-speed chase, not a reckless gamble, just a single turn, a single moment where timing failed. And that's what makes it so haunting. A man who could shape music so precisely couldn't shape that moment. In the end, it wasn't a long sequence of events, but one instant that defined everything after. Sometimes the smallest decisions carry the weight of a lifetime. Luis Salom, the corner where everything changed. The circuit was tight, technical, and unforgiving. At the Catalan Grand Prix, every rider knew there was no room for hesitation. Luis Salom was right in the middle of it all, a fierce competitor fully focused, pushing through each lap with precision and speed. He wasn't just racing others, he was racing the clock, the track, and the limits of control itself. Lap after lap, everything followed a rhythm. Brake, lean, accelerate. A sequence repeated so many times it became instinct. The kind of flow that defines professional racing. To the outside world, it looked like chaos. But for Luis, it was control measured down to the smallest detail. Until one corner broke that rhythm. It happened in an instant. Approaching a familiar turn, something shifted. A slight misalignment, a moment where the bike didn't respond exactly as expected. In racing, there's no time to question, no space to recover. Everything unfolds at once. What should have been just another corner became something else entirely, catching everyone off guard. And that's what makes it so difficult to comprehend. A rider who understood the track, who had taken that same line before, suddenly faced a moment where experience couldn't change the outcome. Not a dramatic mistake, not a reckless move, just a fraction of a second where control slipped away. On a circuit built for speed and precision, sometimes even the smallest deviation is enough to change everything. Dean Berta Vinales, the race that ended before it truly began. The track was alive with energy engines roaring as young riders fought to prove themselves on one of the biggest stages of their careers. Dean Berta Vinales was among them, focused, determined, carrying not just his own ambitions, but the weight of a name already known in racing. At just 15, he wasn't there to participate. He was there to rise. From the very first laps, the intensity was undeniable. Riders pushed close, each one searching for position, but for opportunity, for a moment to stand out. On a track like this, everything happens fast. Decisions, reactions, consequences. There's no space to hesitate, no room to step back. It's a world where control must be absolute, even when everything around you is moving at incredible speed. Then, in a single sequence, the race changed. What started as a competitive moment quickly turned into something no one could fully process in real time. The rhythm broke, the flow disappeared, and the situation escalated faster than anyone could react. For those watching, it was confusing, sudden, impossible to grasp in the moment. And that's what makes it so heavy. A young rider full of potential, caught in a moment where experience couldn't intervene and time didn't allow correction. On a track built for dreams, everything can shift in an instant. Sometimes the race doesn't end at the finish line. It ends in the moment no one was prepared for. Jaden J.O. Archer. The moment greatness met the unexpected. He was known for pushing limits, not just reaching them. Jaden J.O. Archer had built his name on doing what most riders wouldn't even attempt, launching higher, flipping further, and turning impossible ideas into reality. In the world of freestyle motocross, he wasn't just talented, he was fearless. Every jump carried risk, but to him, that risk was part of the art. That day felt like another step forward, another trick, another moment to redefine what could be done in the air. The setup was familiar, the approach calculated, the confidence unmistakable. Jayo had done variations of this before. He knew the timing, the speed, the precision it required. To everyone watching, it looked like just another incredible attempt in a career built on progression. Then something changed. Mid-air, in that brief moment, where everything depends on perfect alignment, the rhythm broke. It was subtle, almost invisible at first, but enough to matter. In freestyle, there's no second chance once you leave the ground. Every movement must connect perfectly. And when one piece falls out of place, everything follows. That's what makes it so haunting. They were legends, voices, icons, heroes, millions admired. But in a single brutal moment on the road, everything ended. A flash of headlights, a screech of tires, and history changed forever. From rock stars to athletes, these lives were cut short in shocking crashes that left the world stunned and grieving. Behind the fame were fragile human stories and endings no one saw coming. Tom Mix. Long before modern action stars filled movie screens, there was Tom Mix, the original cowboy hero of Hollywood. In the 1920s, Mix was one of the biggest names in silent films, a fearless performer known for his daring stunts, sharp shooting skills, and charismatic smile. Wearing his iconic cowboy hat and riding across dusty western landscapes, he appeared in more than 300 films and became one of the most recognizable stars of his time. To millions of fans, Tom Mix wasn't just an actor, he was the Wild West. But on October 12, 1940, the legend's story would come to a sudden and tragic end. That afternoon, Mix was driving his sleek convertible across the desert roads of Arizona. He had just visited the sheriff in Tucson and was heading north, taking a detour along a quiet highway near Florence. The road stretched endlessly across the desert, empty and peaceful beneath the blazing sun. Then, without warning, the journey turned deadly. As Mix drove along the highway, construction barriers suddenly appeared ahead. With almost no time to react, he slammed on the brakes, but it was too late. The car swerved violently and overturned, flipping in a cloud of dust and twisted metal. Inside the wreckage, Tom Mix suffered fatal injuries. When rescuers arrived, the legendary cowboy who had survived countless movie stunts and on-screen gunfights was gone. He was 60 years old. Jack Anglin. In the golden age of country music, Jack Anglin was a voice that millions of Americans instantly recognized. As one half of the beloved duo, the Anglin brothers, he helped shape the warm storytelling style that defined country music in the 1940s and 1950s. His songs carried the simple honesty of small-town America songs about love, faith, family, and the struggles of everyday life. To his fans, Jack Anglin wasn't just a performer. He was part of their lives. But in March of 1963, tragedy was already hanging in the air. Just days earlier, one of Jack's closest friends in the country music world, Patsy Cline, had died in a devastating plane crash, that shocked Nashville and shattered the hearts of fans everywhere. Jack was deeply affected by the loss. Determined to say goodbye to his friend, he got into his car and began driving toward the funeral. It was meant to be a quiet, solemn journey, a final chance to honor someone he cared about. But fate had a cruel twist waiting on the road ahead. As Jack Anglin drove along the highway on March 8, 1963, his vehicle suddenly lost control. In a violent crash, the car slammed into another vehicle, leaving the country singer with fatal injuries. The man who was on his way to mourn a friend would never reach the funeral. Jack Anglin died that day at just 47 years old. The tragedy stunned the country music community. In a heartbreaking twist of fate, two beloved voices of country music were gone within days of each other. Harry Chapin. In the 1970s, few songwriters had the power to move listeners the way Harry Chapin did. He wasn't just singing songs, he was telling stories that felt painfully real. Through unforgettable hits like Taxi and the heartbreaking classic Cats in the Cradle, Chapin captured the struggles, regrets, and fragile moments of everyday life. His music made people stop, think, and sometimes even cry. Beyond the stage, he was also known as a compassionate humanitarian who dedicated much of his life to fighting world hunger. But on July 16, 1981, the storyteller's own story took a tragic turn. That afternoon, Harry Chapin was driving his 1975 Volkswagen Rabbit along the busy Long Island Expressway in New York. He was on his way to perform at a free benefit concert, one of many charity events he often played to support causes he believed in. Even at the height of his fame, helping others had always been part of who he was. The highway was crowded traffic moving fast. Then, in a horrifying moment, disaster struck. A massive semi-trailer truck slammed violently into the back of Chapin's car. The impact crushed the small vehicle and sent it spinning across the highway. Emergency crews rushed to the scene, and Chapin was airlifted by helicopter to Nassau County Medical Center. Doctors fought desperately to save him, but the injuries were too severe. Harry Chapin died that day at just 38 years old. The loss stunned fans around the world. A voice that had spent years telling stories about the human condition had suddenly fallen silent. Yet his message never disappeared. Eddie Cochran. Rock and roll in the late 1950s had a new rebellious heartbeat, and one of the loudest voices behind it was Eddie Cochran. With electrifying hits like Summertime Blues and Come On Everybody, Cochran didn't just sing about teenage freedom, he embodied it. His raw guitar riffs, fearless attitude, and youthful energy made him one of the brightest rising stars of rock music. Fans believed they were witnessing the birth of a legend who would dominate the next decade. But fate had other plans. On the night of April 17, 1960, after finishing a successful tour in the United Kingdom, Cochran climbed into a taxi alongside his girlfriend Sharon Sheeley and fellow musician Gene Vincent. They were heading toward London Airport, preparing to return home to America. The road seemed quiet, almost peaceful. Then, in a split second, everything changed. The taxi lost control on a dark road in Chippenham, England. Tires screamed, metal crushed. The vehicle slammed violently into a lamppost. In the chaos of the crash, Cochran was thrown forward, suffering catastrophic head injuries. Doctors rushed him to the hospital and fought desperately to save him. But the damage was too severe. The next day, at just 21 years old, Eddie Cochran was gone. The world of rock and roll lost not only a star, but a future legend whose story ended far too soon. Even today, the echo of his guitar reminds us of a life that burned bright, but vanished in a single tragic night. Dottie West. In the golden era of country music, few voices carried as much warmth and strength as Dottie West. She wasn't just another singer on the radio, she was a trailblazer. At a time when the country music industry was dominated by men, Dottie fought her way to the top, becoming one of the first female country artists to write her own songs and produce her own records. Her heartfelt voice and emotional storytelling won the love of millions, turning her into one of the Grand Ole Opry's brightest stars. But on August 30th, 1991, that incredible journey took a heartbreaking turn. That evening, Dottie was rushing to make it to a performance at the legendary Grand Ole Opry. Her car suddenly stalled along the road, leaving her stranded and running late. Determined not to miss the show, she flagged down a passing driver, someone she trusted. It was her neighbor, George Thaxton. He offered to drive her the rest of the way. As they approached the Opryland Highway exit ramp, the car sped toward the curve. But the ramp was meant for a slow 25 miles per hour. Witnesses later reported the car was traveling more than double that speed. In an instant, the vehicle lost control. It flew off the ramp, slammed violently into an embankment, and the impact left Dottie with devastating injuries. Doctors fought desperately to save her life, but the damage was too severe. Days later, the beloved country music legend passed away. Lisa Left Eye Lopes. In the 1990s, the